Okay. Welcome back to Case Closed, Anime Review Episode 130. Yes, we're back to canon material here with episode number 1018. This is The Antique Tray Can't Be Hidden, Part 1. And here's something, though, that this episode is, in fact, a episode... Well, this is actually the last one. I kind of felt as though with the last official canon episode that aired, I think it's even short amount of time since the last one. Yes, I do believe so. Like, I don't think it's even that long since like the last official one. I mean, the last one was like episode 1012 was the last official canon episode of the series. And here we are, 6 episodes later. Now, the only reason why I think that the reason why they do this, where it's a short period of time than usual for the last few times, is because the anime has been taking weeks off. That's why it seems like it's getting that the time between canon episodes is getting shorter and shorter. Now, this episode adapts from the manga again, like I said. And it covers the entirety of chapter 1035 and goes to the first 10 pages of 1036. That's as far as I go to. And it is something, though, that we're falling to a case that I previously reviewed 2 years ago. Now, this particular arc is a follow-up to 2 cases. Yes, not 1, but 2. They start off with a bit of animated footage. Yes, something that was not shown in the actual manga itself. Where you see Masami Sarah, where she drives up to Agasa's house and parks in front of it. Yeah, this sequence basically is complete and original. I like it. It's perfectly fine. It sets up something basically it's already shown in the manga, so why not? Oh yeah, we also see Subaru in the scene where he's watching his sister. Yep, from the Kudo house. Yep. And then after the opening title sequence, then we go to the episode itself where we have Conan basically there, Conan at God's house with Hybra, and they bring up a case in this conversation about an antique plate that was discovered by Agasa way back in episode 164 of the anime. When I saw this, I'm like referencing like old case, like, wow, that case looks familiar. And I looked like, oh my gosh, this episode, the case they reference here in the episode, when they show a lot of brief mentioning this one. This aired 22 years ago. And here's the strange thing though. At the time when this manga chapters were released, the arc itself, it had been 23 years since the actual event happened. The manga, like, wow, like a long time. Yes, those episodes covered chapters 110 to 111. At this point, it had been over 900 chapters. I mean, now they follow up with that, but they also follow up with the case that happened 2 cases back with the understudy one. Not the immediate. Actually, it was more like 3 cases back. It wasn't the last one dealing with the Four Clover one or the one the Snowy Mountain one. It's the one that was 3 cases back. They followed up with that one too, which, wow, that's something. And of course, they make it the fact that the actual plate they're looking for, they call it like a tray, where it's rumored to be appraised to be 100 million yen, which is a lot. And Conan wonders why the heck it was called over. It wasn't because of the tray. Oh no, it's because Sarah's outside. Yep. Then of course Hybra gets upset with him, telling her about, well, actually it was Ran who did that, where she asks like, do you know any more children who are very mature for their age? Says, oh yeah, it's Ai-chan. Yep. And of course, they're both like sweating like crazy. And then of course, doorbell rings. Is it Sarah ringing doorbell? Not really, no. She is there. Conan opens the door, and it's Subaru, who's basically here to drop up cherries. And Sarah just happily there. And of course, we have her trying to have a conversation with, of course, Hybra. And of course, Conan brought Subaru over. He's like, really along, so she's not getting suspicious. So they're basically going over to a friend of Agasa's, who was an appraiser, who appraised a particular item for him. Let's see how much it's worth. They also brought up something that is mostly that was mentioned in the manga, but it wasn't like shown, where there was an appraisal show and they mentioned about the whole thing about this crane tray being worth 100 million yen. I don't know how an antique tray can be worth that much, but okay. Basically it's a plate. I know that basically antique plates usually are, like, if they're in good condition, they usually run for a very good amount of money. But in the case of this, I don't know why they call it a trade for. It's a plate. A very expensive looking plate. I mean, my mom has got one of these that she puts on display for Christmas every year. So I tend to ask, why would you call a plate a tray? That makes no sense to me. It's probably the way they do in Japan. I'm not going to criticize, but it just seems kind of weird. It's a plate. It's probably made of glass or it's plastic. My guess is probably made of whatever basically the material usually plate is made of. So they go to visit his friend's house, and Goss is yelling for him. They also mentioned that he actually has a device, a hearing aid made by Goss, that doesn't work half the time. So he goes to find him, and of course they mentioned that he, can't exactly hear it, what the damn thing. So he goes searching for him, and then we see the guy. And we actually, this sequence basically happens next to we see the guy get murdered. It's a slightly extended sequence from the manga. Manga, this is happening over the course of a couple panels, per se. In the anime, this lasts for a good 2 minutes, for at least for a good minute and a half, where we have the guy looking over the tray, and we see the culprit. You don't see him. This person's a silhouette. Could be a guy, could be a woman, who knows. And I mentioned about the road tray thing. They'll think this might be the road tray, but not be this particular person. And then the person says, "That is my tray." And then this person whacks him back in the head with a spear. Yes, a freaking spear. And then of course, Agasa comes running in. We see the thing just laying there. Like mentioned by Hero One, of course, he touches the thing, of course, he lifts it up. He puts it back down because he realized he shouldn't be touching anything because it's mostly going to be a crime scene. So he goes to call an ambulance, because he left his phone in his car. So the culprit later steps out of the wardrobe and then stabs the guy right in the freaking back. And apparently off screen puts the spear back, right where the person found it. Oh yeah, it was their examiner later for fingerprints. Couldn't find any. So this person dead, you see that the plate disappeared, possibly one of the cases, and we see there's also blood on the actual cases. We can't exactly tell which one is whose. So they call the police, and after a cutaway, we come back. Well, actually, before they go to the police, we see 3 people show up. Which they reveal later, basically, we have a salaryman, a retired president of a real estate company, and a director of a museum. And by the way, she's actually 46. I think in the manga, they said the same thing. I could assume, basically, by her appearance, she might have been in her late 30s. But if she's 46, I'm like, she actually looks pretty good for her age. Oh yeah, and they do bring up the fact that the antique dealer who died, the appraiser, is 71. And the guy who was in the far right, he's actually the youngest of the 3. I think he's presumably in his late 30s. So we see the 3 come in. Now in the manga, what happens next is a bit different per se. So they mention these 3 basically were there after, of course, the police show up, and of course they begin the interrogation after they do an overview of the crime scene, reveal about the whole plates thing, and mostly put basically then they decided to do interrogation. Now this is actually a change from the manga. It's pretty much the same dialogue, except they decided to do something uniquely different. They decided, it looks like though, that they brought a table into the room where they just had a body, person got killed. I'm like, wouldn't this be a kidnapping in the crime scene? I mean, it looks like the same room because we have the 3 antique cases happily there, and we have the 3 just lined up, sitting on the floor. Now, in the manga, they were standing up. In the anime, they're sitting down. In my opinion, this actually is a pretty smart move on the studio who made this, purely because it's quite difficult for, let's just say, if you're sitting on the floor and you're a policeman basically looking at a body, doing interrogation, hey, you answer this, like, hey, almost like basically doing, like, looking up the whole time. And from what I can tell from actual American television police shows, they like to have, when they interrogate people, they prefer to be sitting down. If they're sitting down, the suspect has to sit down. If the suspect's sitting, they can be standing if they want to. They want to be on the level, looking at their face. In my opinion, this change makes total sense. So, they reveal exactly what these 3 are up to just prior to the murder. They revealed the murder happened at the 2 o'clock because Agasa found him around 2. The murder happened not long afterwards. They don't confirm exactly what time was at this point. So they talked to the salad man first. He mentions that he was actually looking for the bathroom. Or he was wondering how the house is so big. The guy in the middle was reading a book, and the lady was basically alone in the waiting room. They do mention also that the appraiser has got a wife and son, but they're on vacation. And the housekeepers were out shopping during that period of time. Mainly because of the fact that the woman, the director, the museum director, wanted something up besides sweets to snack on. Like, okay. So, then, of course, thanks to this conversation, Sarah points out, though, and of course, everybody points this out of this whole conversation. They have really good points in this conversation. Sarah easily points by the end of the episode that, with the exception of people in the hallway who have no motive to kill the antique praiser, it's one of the 3 clients. She suspects that one of them is the culprit. And I don't think that McGuire himself would disagree with that. That actually is a really good assessment. The fact these 3 who have really good motive, and of course he does open up the actual cases themselves before it begins the interrogation, and he's shocked to see that the trays all look exactly the same. They do bring up about possibly one of them might be worth 100 million yen, basically a lot of money. Takagi is shocked to hear this. Yep. But that's pretty much the episode. Nothing particularly wrong with this episode per se. It didn't feel like, though, the pacing was too fast. No, it was pretty reasonable length. And the way they adapted this particular episode, where they adapted like a whole chapter and like portion of a chapter, is perfectly fine. I've got personally no problem with that at all. I mean, if by look at this episode and what they adapted, it only changed one thing, and that position the 3 suspects were in. Because manga standing up, in the anime sitting down at a table. So it looks like next week's episode is going to be looking at the actual back of the actual cases, because the back of the plates, because there's blood in all 3 of them, which I'm going to explore at next week's episode. Anything to dislike about this episode? Not really, no. Like, Sarah being there is great, because this is actually a recent case for her. This was actually in the manga, I believe, her second to most recent case she's actually appeared in. Because after this case wraps up in the manga, she appears in one more case, and as far as I can tell, that's it. Because she has not appeared in recent stuff even after that. I mean, her last case that she physically appeared in was basically a birthday case. It was Sister's Party murder case. That was the last official one that she appeared in. And that was that. Oh, and the whole thing, basically what they mentioned about that last episode, it was the Sun Stars and Murder puzzle case, where Goss invited the detective boys to look about the mansion looking for treasure. Now, in the actual episode itself, Hyper was actually mentioned to be there, even though in the They later retcon in the anime that she was actually not there. In this episode, they mentioned this before she joined them, which is interesting that they keep that part in the actual anime. My guess is this is probably TMS's apology for adapting some of the early cases out of order. Yes, because if you look at what was adapted for the anime, some of these cases were adapted out of order for like no reason. I'm not kidding about that. They seriously were adapted out of order. Some of it, yeah, some of it was quite weird. Like, take for example the first like 3 cases, all adapted in order, and then they just skip around a bit, which not really sure why they do this for, but they do this. Yes, that's what they did early on for quite some time. Like, take for example when they had a re-encounter with the people from the black organization. In the actual anime, when the first they adapted the first train case they actually had Jin and Baka actually appear in the manga. In the anime, they changed it to random guys. They later readapted this particular scene and put it back in. Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed though about it. That TMS is basically, well, the team behind the series is making up for past mistakes, which is good. The fact that they're doing this, and this actually is another way to basically kind of fix it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, not much else to say about this particular episode. It's good. Nothing really wrong with it, and I like the fact they actually do apology for screwing up in the past. Okay, so that's it for Circle of You. Next review is going to be Boruto. Okay, next video. Bye.